I think crypto's got a great future. I think it really does. Maybe we'll pay off the $35 trillion in crypto. I'll write out a little piece of paper, 35 trillion crypto. We have no debt.
It did not get a lot of attention at the time, but in the lead up to the election, Donald Trump really did say that he wants to pay down the national debt using cryptocurrency. And now that he's been elected, Trump's wild crypto fantasies may very well become reality. As Charlie Warzel writes for The Atlantic, there is speculation that Trump could make good on a proposal to create a strategic reserve of bitcoins in the U.S., which could involve the federal government buying 200,000 bitcoins a year over the next 5 years, perhaps by using the country's gold reserves. For large crypto holders, this would be an incredible scheme, a wealth transfer from the government to crypto whales. That seems like a pretty crazy thing to do, not least because cryptocurrency claims to be all about creating money that does not rely on the U.S. government. But it makes sense when you understand cryptocurrency not as a new technology or the symbol of some online libertarian movement, but as an industry rife with speculators looking to cash in on Donald Trump's second term. As Warzel writes, whether Trump understands crypto beyond the basic notion that it's a good way to win votes and get rich off the backs of his most fanatical supporters is not clear. But the alliance between Trump and the crypto constituency makes sense philosophically. Trump is corrupt and he loves money. Joining me now is the author of that piece, Charlie Warzel, who is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Charlie, I'm such a fan of your writing, and this piece in particular was very helpful for me, and I'm sure many other people who read it, to understand the handshake between MAGA and crypto. Can you elaborate more on the sort of anti-institutional bent that unites these two subgroups of people and why there's so much kinship in these two worlds?
Yeah, there's a lot of synergy here, and a lot of it is probably cynical, right? As I wrote in the piece, there is, crypto kind of seems like a technology that was in some ways built for the way Donald Trump likes to conduct business, right? Which is like off the books and sort of nakedly financial. Like greed is good in the crypto ecosystem, right? That's a very Trumpian thing. But perhaps more important, I think, is the ethos of cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin, and this idea of blockchain, the technology it's built off of, which, it is an anti-institutional technology. That's the way that it was created to take the middleman out, to take away the banks and the central bankers and the government and the oversight and the regulation and all those institutional guardrails that, they help protect people, but they also leave people out of the financial system. People who are into crypto are really into that anti-institutional authority. And it makes a lot of sense. We are in an extremely low trust moment. The MAGA world is full of people who are incredibly skeptical and distrustful and resentful of elites, and they like the idea of this. So this culture has a real, overlap with the MAGA, the Trump ethos.
Yeah, nothing says anti-institutional like the U.S. president creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve built on gold. What? Can we talk about the irony of maybe using federal gold reserves to buy a strategic Bitcoin reserve? The whole point of crypto is that it's outside the government. Do you see any issue with the creation of this? Do we need to worry about a crypto cash? Also, will the public care? This is undermining the very point of crypto.
It's undermining the point. It's hypocritical, but it's also very alarming, I think. Who's to say whether Donald Trump's going to make good on any of this, or whether this is like lip service to a constituency that, put a lot of money behind him and put a lot of faith in him. I think what's really alarming about this is the fact that this would be a wealth transfer from the federal government to the people who currently hold a lot of Bitcoin. The government would be buying Bitcoin from these people. And every year, it would buy about 200,000 Bitcoins. Every year it did that purchase would drive the price of Bitcoin up, further enriching those people who have crypto, and then making it so that the next year, when the government was buying those reserves, it would cost the government more money. They would be getting a worse price. And then, aside of the corruption element of that, you also have this idea of the government having this strategic reserve of the most volatile currency that has really existed that's not like tulips, right? It's a very alarming thing for our global financial system and our government to be enmeshed with this technology that's like best suited for doing crime.
Well, and as you point out, the narrative of that, taking crypto bros and making them richer year over year is not something that the quote unquote populist working class, agenda of MAGA would tolerate, right? I mean, in theory, it's such an obvious transfer of wealth, like many other Trump policies, to the richest again and again and again. One would think there would be political fallout from that.
When I put this, all of this stuff, the whole, the Trump policies, the notion that, crypto has enriched a certain set of people who've become really important political donors, to this researcher, Molly White, who studies cryptocurrencies and the volatile effects. What she said to me was very striking, which essentially is there is this anti-institutional authority adopted by these folks, but then once they get the power or the influence, they basically lose that and say, well, we're not anti-institutionalists. It's just we want to be the institutions. We want to be the authority. And that's, I think, what we're trying to see here with, if these Trump proposals go through, if we start to see, the posh regulations for crypto that help it thrive, I think what's going to happen is it's just going to be a new set of authority, and it's going to be the people who are rich from this speculative asset. I mean,
Charlie, it's a great piece. I'm a big fan of your writing, like I said at the top of the segment. Everybody should go read it. It's important perspective bringing for the coming months and years. Thank you for your time in this busy holiday season. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Aaron, as we look at this, what might be different than your coverage, as your coverage goes forward, is that this second term of President Trump will effectively be at some point a lame duck term, right? And does this mean that most watching, those who are on the ground there, believe that we will see more of what we saw in the first administration, more gloves off, or the opposite of what that might be, given that he's not running for re-election this time around for various reasons?
Yeah, we talked about the idea of a mandate, right? I think that because the administration that's coming in believes that they do have a mandate, they believe that they have policy ideas that they can fully execute and that they should fully execute with the support of all the people who voted for Donald Trump. And there will be things that we saw last time around that quite likely will come back. We've been talking about the President Biden's commuting the sentences of 37 men who were on the federal death row just yesterday, as a matter of fact. 37 of the 40 men who are on death row, right, or were on death row as of yesterday. Well, we know that during the Trump administration, he wanted to make sure that the execution option was something that stayed available to people who were offenders, murderers and things of that nature. Well, this time around, he has said that he wants to see drug dealers potentially get death sentences. He wants to see migrants who kill Americans get death sentences as well. And we know that there, in the last several hours, that the president-elect has released, posted a statement consistent with what his team said yesterday, that he fully intends to use the death penalty as an option. The statement that he posted on his social media site says, "As soon as I am inaugurated, I will direct the Justice Department to vigorously pursue the death penalty to protect American families and children from violent rapists, murderers, and monsters." That is something that we heard last time around, and obviously something that we are now hearing again from him. So I think, Richard, you can expect that it will be full steam ahead for the incoming administration. The president-elect has said that within a couple of hours of being inaugurated, he intends to fully activate his government and go forward with the policies that he's talked about.
Sam, back to you, reflecting what Aaron was reporting there. I know that technicalities interrupted us there for a second, but
Sure.
Back to you, Sam.
Well, I'm sorry for the technical interruptions. I just think that we're going to see a real dramatic shift in approach on January 20th. I mean, what we're talking about in terms of immigration policy alone, for instance, it's not just mass deportations. There's going to be an effort to end birthright citizenship right away. And when you're talking about criminal justice, Aaron went through the entire list. When you're talking about healthcare, presuming that RFK Jr. is confirmed, we're talking about incredibly dramatic changes in direction in terms of funding biomedical research, fluoride in the water, emphasis on different FDA regulations and things like that. When you're talking about foreign policy, I mean, the team that Trump has put together, led by Tulsi Gabbard, basically led by him too, has a whole different tone and approach to the world than the Biden administration. So it will feel like whiplash. And when you talk to Democrats about it, what they're concerned about is separating the signal from the noise. They're actually worried about being overwhelmed by things to have to push back against and trying to have to prioritize certain things over the other. So, it is going to feel like a different country on January 21st.
Sam Stein, Aaron Gilchrist, thank you both for your reporting. Have a great Tuesday.
Hard line on immigration was a critical factor in Donald Trump's 2024 victory. Another, of course, was evangelical voters. But there's a section of that portion of the American electorate that has a lot at stake, but may not be getting as much attention, and that is Latino evangelical voters. Joining us now is Reverend Gabriel Salguero, president of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition and pastor of The Gathering Place in Orlando. He is a registered independent, as are 32% of the roughly 9 million Latino evangelicals in the U.S. All right, Reverend, when people picture Republican voting evangelicals in their head, are they picturing members of your community? And if not, why not?
I don't think they are, Christina. I think we remain invisible. Brown evangelicals or Latino evangelicals, which historically are independently minded, more than our white evangelical counterparts. Usually when you see in the headlines, evangelical voted, they're not really considering Latino evangelicals. And there's about 9 million of us living in the United States.
So, I mean, President Trump's success was driven by gains, and some found them surprising gains he made with Latino voters. And that support was especially strong among Latino evangelicals. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit because at first glance, it seems like a bit of a disconnect if you're voting for someone who's actively saying he wants to deport members potentially of your community. Why do you think in the end they made that decision to support Trump, even at the risk of their friends, neighbors, maybe even some relatives who could end up getting deported if this new policies go into place?
I think it's important for us to realize that Latino evangelicals are not a monolith, nor are they one-issue voters. And so when I walk into a room and I say I'm Latino, people assume I'm a Democrat. And when I walk into a room and I say I'm an evangelical pastor, people assume I'm a Republican. But I'm both, evangelical and Latino. Part of the reason why I'm an independent voter, because neither party has a monopoly on all our issues. And so we are historically socially conservative. We are historically for religious liberty. But at the same time, we value immigration reform that respects the dignity of every human being. We value criminal justice reform. Our coalition was against the death penalty. We want a balanced budget, but not on the backs of the poor. So we're for the child tax credit and for earned income tax credit. And so there's a whole host of issues that Latino evangelicals vote around that historically people think, well, evangelicals are one-issue voters or two-issue voters. But that's not the case for Latino evangelicals.
What are people in your congregation telling you about when they go to the polls? What were the issues that you were hearing about? Because it seems like Democratic and Republican operatives may have had some idea, but as you mentioned, Latinos are not a monolith. It's a very diverse community. Different things are more important to different people. So when it comes to Latino evangelicals, what were at the top of their list when they went to the polls?
I think, like all other U.S. citizens, the economy was, can we pay our mortgage? Can we pay our rent? We have to choose between, especially amongst our seniors, between medicine and paying the rent. For children, will we be able to afford their future education, college or higher education? But immigration is also among that. We were really concerned, and I publicly made statements against any xenophobic rhetoric. We were deeply concerned by the phrases of poisoning the blood of our nation that came out of President-elect Trump's campaign. And so it's a whole host of issues, but immigration is just one of the many issues. The others, of course, being the economy, of course, being protecting anti-poverty programs, of course, religious liberty, of course, our concerns about our children.
Are members of your community, of your parish, are they concerned about possible deportations under these new possible immigration policies? And what are you doing to prepare?
We're beyond concern. Donald Trump's rhetoric has sent a chill up the Latino evangelical church's spine. We have said it before and we'll say it again. We are pro-immigrant churches and pro-family churches. And any mass deportation threat, whether it's with the intent to produce self-deportation or to scare our communities, is going to be met by resistance by Latino evangelicals. Of course, we want for criminal, violent immigrants to be dealt with. The majority of immigrants in this country are hardworking. They go to our Sunday schools. They worship with us. And when we heard that the possibility of ending the practices of protecting sensitive places like schools and hospitals and churches, we lifted up our voices. And our coalition said, we want the incoming administration to deeply reconsider how they're going to approach immigration. Surely they can target violent immigrants without disrupting mixed status families, without disrupting places of worship. And at the same time, the truth is, Congress has to get its act together. This is a legislative problem. We need bipartisan, common sense, humane immigration reform. But on behalf of our coalition, my church, we're deeply concerned that there's an intentional messaging and rhetoric that borders on xenophobia that is trying to scare our people or will disrupt mixed status families.
Give us the context of this most recent statement. Of course, this is not the first time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think we're in a place now where we're talking a lot more about places like Panama and Greenland than we have perhaps in the past in a lot of places around this country. But to sort of back up for you here, Greenland is a country that the former president, that the president-elect talked about in his last term, talked about acquiring from Denmark. And to explain that, Greenland is an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. And the folks in Denmark said, no, Greenland is not for sale. I want you to hear a little bit, though, of what Mr. Trump had to say about Greenland. This was back in 2019. Watch this.
I don't know. It got released somehow. It's just something we talked about. Denmark essentially owns it. We're very good allies with Denmark. We protect Denmark like we protect large portions of the world. So the concept came up, and I said, certainly I'd be strategically, it's interesting, and we'd be interested. I thought that the Prime Minister's statement that it was absurd, it was an absurd idea, was nasty. I thought it was an inappropriate statement. All she had to do is say, no, we wouldn't be interested.
So the Prime Minister of Denmark back then said, no, we're not interested in the sale. Trump was supposed to travel to Denmark and canceled that trip as a result of some of the comments back then. And again, here we are in 2024. The idea of somehow acquiring Denmark has come up again and again. Acquiring Greenland has come up again. And again, the response from Greenland, from Denmark, has been that Greenland is not for sale and never is going to be. And so it's a non-starter conversation from their perspective. Richard.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Julie, to you on this. When you think of Greenland, why might the president-elect be interested in Greenland? Is it national security? Is it natural resources? What might be the logic behind this? We did not hear about this discussed during the election, and we're hearing it now, of course, at his first major rally since becoming president-elect.
Well, I'm not going to sane-wash Donald Trump by trying to ascribe what motives he might have to trying to acquire Greenland or trying to make Canada the 51st state or trying to make the Panama Canal American again, other than to say that he has an expansionist view that is very much in line with his hero, Vladimir Putin, who apparently also wants to seize land that doesn't belong to his country. It's strange because I think people voted for Donald Trump because of the price of eggs, right? They didn't vote for Donald Trump because they want to annex Greenland or they want to get retaliation on behalf of the Trump organization that was accused of evading taxes in Panama by going after the Panamanians and their canal. And certainly I don't think anybody's interested in making Canada the 51st state who voted for Donald Trump. So I can't really think of the rationale for this other than this is something that obviously was put in his ear by somebody and he decided to run with it, which is usually how he creates policy and has for the last 10 years.
Governor, I want to lean in on the topic of the Panama Canal and Panama, and I want you to listen first off to a Republican congressman and what he said about this idea of the Panama Canal.
I always take them seriously, even though they may sound a little bit, out there. I always take the president seriously, and it's a legitimate threat to Panama. He wants a better deal. And I think we need to get a better deal from Panama. And also we need to get rid of Chinese influence on the Panama Canal.
So, Governor, two ways or two items that were brought up by that Congress member. First off, the cost could be hundreds of thousands of dollars per boat, which is what the president says is why he's interested. They're too high, those fees. Second of all, is this idea of China and Russia and a trade route and being competitive with China. Your thought?
Well, yeah, Richard, let me cover both of them. First of all, with Greenland. Look, Greenland has what's called rare earth materials. These are very, very important for national security, for a lot of U.S. manufacturing. China, who we're kind of in a trade war, not kind of, we're in a trade war with, has a lot of these rare earth materials. It would make sense for us to be able to work with the Danes to make sure that we have access to them. And, of course, it's also a shipping lane as well. So, but we're not going to get to the point where we're going to, buy Greenland. But I want to cover also the Panama Canal. The problem there is first of all, there are high rates for going through the canal. But look, it's being those ships that are going through that canal are not U.S. They're foreign carriers. And they're charging us an arm and a leg, not just down in Panama, but really all over the world. So, who are those ships? Where do they come from? They come from Denmark. They come from Germany. You see, this all gets back, Richard, to the issue of NATO and our allies. And this is what we have to be careful of. If we are, insulting them or stepping on them, at some point, they're not going to want to cooperate with us. And that's really an issue here. Look, there's a legitimate concern about these rare earth materials. There's a legitimate concern, but we don't have foreign carriers. We don't have U.S. carriers. We have foreign carriers, and it's like a monopoly, and they rip us off. There's no question about it. But in order to get that under control, we're going to have to work with other governments. We don't want to insult other governments. That's my view of this.
Back to you, Aaron. When you look at President Biden's take on these very topics, the previous president or the president-elect, Trump, did mention Greenland during his earlier administration. Did President Biden follow up on that very topic with, for instance, the leaders of Greenland and Denmark at all? And what were the interactions like?
I think the short answer to that is no. There's not been any engagement with those countries as a result of what the former president, the president-elect, said he wanted to do. At the same time, the governor makes a really good point about these rare minerals and resources that are in Greenland. Those are things that the U.S. government is obviously very much aware of. There are military assets, U.S. military assets, also in Greenland. And so the Biden administration has made a very deliberate effort to maintain good working relationships and development, economic and national security development relationships with the Danes, and obviously on Greenland in particular, trying to support national security interests here and to make sure that there is a way to have U.S. allies have the same sorts of relationships with the Danes as it relates to Greenland and being able to have access to those rare earth materials that are on the island. And so that's what really has been a focus of the Biden administration over the last almost 4 years now in terms of its interactions with Greenland, not necessarily interactions that are trying to sort of make things better after what President-elect Trump said several years back.
Governor, building on what Aaron was saying there, national security, international security, these are real issues. We are looking at a part of the world that is adjacent to Russia, and that we do have a military base, the United States does, in the northern parts of Greenland specifically. When you look at those who might write this off as not so serious, what might be the seriousness about this that some may be underestimating in terms of this idea at some level?
Well, one of the concerns is that China, in the middle of a serious trade war, if things continue to get worse, China could withhold these rare earth materials, these minerals, which we really need. So this is not about the fact that we want to dismiss that. It's just you're not going to get there by beating up Denmark. It's just not going to happen. But we're back to NATO. We're back to the Western nations, which have to work together for everybody's security. Look, you give the president credit for working them over a little bit to get them to spend more money on defense. They should. But that cooperation should also yield some good things for us. And, you know, one of the concerns, Richard, when it comes to shipping, for example, is we don't have a fleet. We don't have a U.S. fleet. Trying to rebuild it costs a fortune to do that. So we rely on these foreign carriers. And I've seen times when they've just spiked everything up. And you remember this dock war, this war with the longshoremen. That was because what was been happening is these foreign carriers operate in countries that we have relationships with. They want to modernize the ports, and the workers there say, we don't want you to modernize it because we don't want to lose our jobs. So there's lots of things tied up. But being able to talk to other governments and get them to work with us is, I think, a prescription for success, as I said a little bit earlier.
Right. And Julie, to you on this, those are real practical topics potentially for the consumer. As we remember that supply chain fiasco that the governor was bringing up, we all saw it across the country. We all felt it. All of a sudden, we became aware of what ports are and the different flags that these boats have that we never thought of before. Might this be a way of getting Democrats to respond to something that really does affect, if you will, the everyday person? And what might be that response from Democrats?
Well, look, there's a big difference between saying that we want cheaper routes through the Panama Canal and negotiating with the Panamanian government on that. Certainly, you can negotiate with the Danish on rare earth minerals and other aspects of whatever you want to have in Greenland, including national security. The way to not do that is to demean and to say that we're going to get our way, because, you know, up to a point, you start to sound very much, as I said earlier, like Vladimir Putin, who says, well, you know what, we want a fleet on the Black Sea, so we're going to annex Crimea, or we want the breadbasket of Europe to be part of our country, so we're going to annex Ukraine. This is 19th century thinking. This is not how people operate and the countries operate and nations operate or should operate in the 21st century. Negotiation and diplomacy is how you do it. You don't do it by sheer brute force, because we see how that ends up. And ultimately, as much as the United States thinks that we don't want to be pushed around by anybody, nobody is pushing us around. Everybody's trying to negotiate the best deal for themselves and for their country. We have more ability to do that because we're the United States, but it doesn't mean that you need to start going down to Central America or going up to Greenland or going over to Europe and bigfooting countries and effectively saying that if we don't get our way, we're going to take it by force, or we're going to just acquire it, when nobody's interested in being acquired. And that's the bottom line. Look, you may be happy or you may be unhappy with the fact that the United States cut a deal in the 70s to give the Panama Canal back to the Panamanians, but nevertheless, here we are. You may not be happy that the Danes have Greenland, but nevertheless, here we are. And so rather than strong-arming all of our allies into having things done our way, what we need to do is figure out a diplomatic route, which is something Donald Trump is just entirely incapable of doing, to try to get to what Governor Kasich was saying, which is that these are real concerns from both a national security perspective and from a trade perspective. And nevertheless, you cannot do that by not sitting down and talking to our allies and not as adversaries.
More defiant messages from Matt Gaetz after the House Ethics Committee released its report. Lawmakers say they found substantial evidence that he engaged in a long list of conduct that violates House rules, as well as some actions that could be criminal at the state level. Last night, Gaetz posted this photo of an article from November on social media. It says, "Matt, very unfair," and is signed. Matt Gaetz says it's from President-elect Donald Trump, but NBC News has not confirmed that. Gaetz has denied all wrongdoing in the ethics investigation. And joining us now is NBC News' Julie Serkin, tracking the fallout. Also with us is Jacqueline Alemany, congressional investigations reporter for The Washington Post. So, Julie, we're not hearing much from leaders of the Republican Party, but what does, I think, Matt Gaetz' political future look like, given the fact that he's floated running for office, maybe even the Senate in Florida?
Well, certainly the release of this ethics report, the findings in this 42-page report complicate Matt Gaetz's political future. And I think that is a big reason why at least 2 Republicans on that panel voted with all Democrats to move ahead and release this report, even though the panel's chairman, Michael Guest, in a statement later on said that that was not a move he supported because Matt Gaetz is not currently a member of Congress. Because of the president, he says that that could set. Either way, though, this report is now out there, and the committee had found that Gaetz had violated Florida's or may have violated Florida's statutory rape law by engaging in sexual activity with a 17-year-old. This was years ago, but that 17-year-old was interviewed by the panel. She said she was just a junior in high school at the time. Also, the panel found that Gaetz had texted women. Text messages showed, rather, that he had paid thousands of dollars to women to engage in sexual activity, and also that he did use illicit drugs. Now, Gaetz does deny all of that, but he did say a couple of weeks ago, Yamiche, when we first reported that the committee had voted to make this report public, that he did engage in womanizing and he did smoke and drink too much, but that none of that should be criminal. And of course, the DOJ did not ultimately charge Gaetz.
Yeah. It's interesting when you break that all down and the idea that the DOJ did not charge him. But, Jackie, yesterday, Steve Bannon, of course, a former Trump strategist, someone who still has a very loud megaphone, said Matt Gaetz, quote, must return like Trump returned. Don't back down, double down. That's the words of Steve Bannon. Is there any support in Trump world for a political comeback from Matt Gaetz? We know he's lined up a sort of anchor job at a right-wing network, but I wonder about the political stakes here.
Yeah, Yamiche, it's hard to tell just yet, but we do know, as often happens in Trump world, there's a domino effect when one major MAGA figure with a big megaphone sort of starts the rallying cry for political retribution. Bannon, during his podcast on War Room yesterday, said that Gaetz needed to take a cue from Trump and fight back and make some sort of comeback to prove his critics wrong, and that doing otherwise would be tantamount to accepting defeat. Of course, Gaetz said last month that he had no plans on returning for Congress. Whether or not he's eyeing the vacant Senate seat remains to be seen. But if the message couldn't have been clearer from some of the most extremist MAGA adherents yesterday on social media, which was that Gaetz should keep fighting, and that returning to his job that he's expected to start as anchor at One American News Network, OAN, in January, again, should not be accepted, and that Gaetz should remain in the arena, or that Trump should appoint him to a different position after he withdrew from Attorney General last month.
Really interesting. And Matt Gaetz, though, of course, has denied all wrongdoing, Jackie, and said he was never charged. But what does the report, the House Ethics Report, actually say in regard to the evidence?
Yeah, this is important, Yamiche, because Gaetz has, over the past several months and years, really adamantly and vehemently denied these allegations. And actually, his denials were so vocal that the committee took the rare step of issuing multiple public statements along the way, advising the public of their status updates on their investigation into Gaetz, and sort of previewing what was to come. And as Julie noted, took the extraordinary step of issuing a report after he had already resigned from Congress. But I think the most important thing that the committee found that Gaetz has repeatedly denied is that he did have sex with a 17-year-old in July of 2017 that they concluded is in violation of Florida's statutory rape law. There's a key graph that I'll read, which is the committee received evidence that Gaetz did not learn that victim A was 17 years old until more than a month after their first sexual encounter. However, statutory rape is a strict liability crime. After he learned that victim A was a minor, he maintained contact, and less than 6 months after she turned 18, he met up with her again for commercial sex. The Florida statewide prosecutor has not commented on these allegations, but it is possible that local enforcement authorities could pursue further review of these allegations made by the Ethics Committee.
NBC's Adrian Broadus is live at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. Also with us, Clint Henderson, managing editor for the travel blog The Points Guy. Adrian, get us up to date. What happened? Where are we at?
You know what, Richard, right now we are seeing the ripple effects based on what happened this morning. Even though that ground stop, which was nationwide for American Airlines, only lasted an hour, the impact is being felt here in Chicago. As soon as the ground stop was lifted, we saw the number of delays piling up on the message board. For example, one flight that was scheduled to take off earlier this morning heading to Denver was delayed by 2 hours before it finally departed. Another flight going to Atlanta delayed by 90 minutes. Now, American Airlines releasing a statement saying in part a vendor technology issue briefly affected flights this morning. That issue has been resolved and flights have resumed. The airlines went on to apologize to its customers for the inconvenience, saying in part all hands are on deck as it diligently tries to get travelers to where they need to be. We spoke with one gentleman on his way to Los Angeles. He says it's been a roller coaster of emotions. Take a listen.
It's very irritating because it's hard to plan. So cars that were scheduled had to be rescheduled, and the cost of Ubers is skyrocketing. So it was a little difficult, but glad that I'm finally here.
And that traveler says he received an alert earlier this morning saying his flight was canceled. Then he received another notification saying his flight was back on. So as you imagine, he had to rush and scramble and get here to the airport. And that has been the case for other travelers waiting until the day before Christmas or the start of Hanukkah to reach their destination. So the timing, not the best for American Airlines.
Yeah, you don't want to get those alerts, but you're glad you get those alerts until you get the alerts and you go, well, I guess I need those alerts. And Clint, talking of those alerts and the subsystems that drive the airlines across the country, when it's, they say one of their vendors that caused this to happen, what does that say about all the airlines and what we'll be facing over the next 10 days or so?
Well, good on American for getting it resolved so quickly. I think, we could have been looking at a CrowdStrike type of situation like we saw over the summer when meltdowns dragged on for days. This was resolved pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, these systems are so dependent on software and technology that when one thing goes wrong, it can really cause a cascade. I will say the airlines seem to be recovering more quickly from snafus like this. We have seen, delays and cancellations don't go on for days anymore. It's a matter of hours. And I think American got this resolved pretty quickly. So that's the good news. And also the fact that, today is one of the lightest of the holiday period. So if you're traveling on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, it's generally a little lighter load. So that helps too. But glad this is on the mend.
Yeah, I was looking at the background where Adrian was at and saying, that's not the O'Hare I know. And it looks people fairly calm. And in other words, not shoulder to shoulder. Clint, what's the way around this? Should you go into the airport with a carry-on thinking you'll get onto some plane at some point because of the fact that most airlines do allow returns within 24 hours? Do you get another flight? Do you buy 2, 3 flights so you make sure you get there?
I don't think you have to buy more than one flight, but if you see that one carrier is having a lot of issues, you should have a backup plan. So you should know if you're flying I was tracking a flight from New York to San Francisco this morning. It left about 3 hours late. But if I was on that JFK to SFO flight, I know Delta has a flight. I know United has a flight. So I would have a backup in mind in case I needed to pull the trigger and buy my own ticket and then hope for reimbursement later. In this case, the outage didn't last too long, so you can sort of plan around that. But I would get to the airport on time no matter what, because as that passenger pointed out, sometimes even if the flight's delayed 2 or 3 hours, the airline will find a backup plane and get you back on time. So you don't want to miss that. You don't want to miss that flight.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the high price season. How does the first quarter, second quarter of the next year look in terms of prices? Should we buy right now if we know where we're going?
Yeah, absolutely. Set those Google flight alerts. It's time to book spring break flights already if you want to get ahead of the curve and get the cheapest flights. So look ahead. But so far, airfare is about even with last year, and it's the one area of travel that's actually not skyrocketed. So we are still seeing deals round trip to Europe under 500 from New York. So the deals are out there.